Oh yeah, I forgot that my ace flag fell off the wall. Should really fix that. Oh well. Well, I guess we're just going to have to do this video from on the floor. That's fine. It's a lockdown. We'll keep things casual. Representation in the media can be a wonderful thing. If you're part of a minority group, then it can be utterly refreshing to see yourself reflected in the stuff that you're watching. It's cathartic, it's nice, it feels good. And it also serves a greater purpose, because it can help to normalise your group in the eyes of a public that may not know much about it. As an asexual, I got to see a really great example of this early this year in the second season of the Netflix show Sex Education, where we were introduced to Florence.
I'm basically Meryl Streep, but young. And Scottish.
A character who sees all the constant pressure of the world to be sexual, and cannot understand why she doesn't feel the same way as her peers. She goes to sex counsellor Gillian Anderson, who I think is just playing herself.
You always need to wash your penis.
Always?
Always.
And she tells Florence about asexuality and reassures her that she can't be broken because sex doesn't make people whole. This was staggeringly good, and I nearly cried when I saw it. I was seen in that moment, and I could tell people I know who watch the show that this is what it's like being in my brain.
It's sort of like I'm surrounded by a huge feast with everything I could want to eat, but I'm not hungry.
And that was so great. And it doesn't take much to impress me. Like, in Philosophy Tube's most recent video, he mentioned asexuals for a single line, and I got excited enough that I tweeted about it. So you can imagine just how happy I was without Florence. But there is a double-edged sword to this, because not all representation is good representation. Sometimes people will try and put characters from a minority group into their film or show, and they'll do such a bad job of it that it can actually set the cause of normalising these ideas back. If handled poorly enough, then it can actually make people far more aggressive towards the group in question. For instance, all those comedies that feature trans characters solely so that the male character would think that they'd been deceived into being gay, which has never not yikes and undoubtedly affected the perception of a lot of the very vocal transphobes we're seeing today. And this brings us to the subject of today's video. House. Yeah, the show about the doctor with the limp played by Hugh Laurie doing an American accent that was apparently so convincing it was a long-running joke that people didn't realise he was English.
No, nothing. I didn't realize we were doing British accents. Well, no, we're not. I'm British. It's the way I talk. Sure it is, Hugh.
It was almost inexplicably popular back in the day, and in its 8th season, there was an episode with an asexual couple in it. And it was very awful. And that's what I'm going to talk about right now, because I literally don't have anything better to do. I mean, I can't go outside. The episode in question is Season 8, Episode 9, Better Half. In the episode, House's only friend Wilson has a patient who mentions that she and her husband are asexual. Wilson tells House, who acts incredulous and decides that this cannot possibly be a thing, and they make a $100 bet that House can find a medical reason for the lack of interest in sex. House looks over her blood work, doesn't find anything, brings her husband in under false pretenses and runs tests on him. He discovers that her husband has a tumour by his pituitary gland that lowers his libido and causes erectile dysfunction, and so he isn't actually ace. Then his wife reveals to him that she's been lying to him for the past 10 years, and also isn't asexual. House wins the bet, and having successfully disproved a sexual identity, uses the $100 bill to light cigars for him and Wilson, and I weep in frustrated rage. I think it should be abundantly clear why this is awful. Dr. House literally disproves a valid sexual orientation just for fun. The show treats ace people with such a callous disregard that we're seen as either people who don't know our own bodies or liars. But I feel as though I should stress that this is only the episode's B-plot. The main focus is on a man with Alzheimer's getting sick and his wife struggling to stay with him. There's also some of the season arc stuff about House and Foreman clashing. Hell, the ace stuff might even actually be considered the C-plot. So there really isn't a lot to it, and I don't want to spend an inordinate amount of time going over every scene of it in minute detail. The main things to take from it are that 1. The episode fundamentally misunderstands asexuality, and 2. House was always going to be the wrong show to try and tackle this topic. Now, I'm no doctor. Not sure why you were under that impression, to be honest. So I can't speak to the medical accuracy of a tumour on the pituitary lowering libido and causing erectile dysfunction. So let's just work off the assumption that that is a medically accurate thing that can happen. This guy loses his libido and his penis doesn't work, and that's why he identifies as asexual. But this is not what being asexual is. A lack of sexual attraction does not equal your naughty bits not working. I mean, I'm asexual and I have a libido. I am capable of arousal. I mean, surely you allos have had points where you've just felt randomly turned on for no apparent reason.
No reason, boner. I like coleslaw, but not that much.
It doesn't always take being sexually attracted to someone to get the juices flowing, you know? The equipment functions, it's just not pointed at anyone. I mean, that's kind of what porn's for. But of course, my experience is by no means a universal one. There are non-libidoists out there, both asexual and alloasexual. Some people just don't get those feelings, and that's not a problem. You don't need arousal to be happy, and there doesn't need to be some sort of medical cause for this to be the case. Some people are just wired differently. Not everyone's lived experience will match up to yours, and that's fine. You don't need to have a one-to-one emotional understanding of what someone else is going through to believe that their experiences are equally valid to your own. Things we shouldn't have to say, but we say anyway. The other area of asexuality this episode really doesn't get is relationships. The wife is only pretending to be asexual because she loves her husband and wants to be with him, and the only way to be with an ace person is to also be ace, right? No, this is not right. Plenty of ace people are in happy, healthy relationships with allo people. Partly because some asexuals, such as grey and demisexuals, will feel sexual attraction under certain circumstances. Partly because romantic attraction plays a big part in forming a relationship with someone, though not everyone experiences romantic attraction, and I will get the aromantic flag right this time because you're all valid and I support you. And partly through what is perhaps the most important thing in forming any relationship with any other human being: open and honest communication about your wants and needs. Now, I'm not one to turn to for relationship advice, but seems to me that not lying to your partner about the way that you identify is probably a good start. But no, in this episode it has to be that she's been lying to him, because the only way anyone could conceive of an ace person being in a relationship is if they're with another ace person. It feels really off-putting, and it makes you wonder how they've been married all this time without it ever coming up. Of course, ultimately, this reveal is just there to prove House right. This is what amounts to the biggest problem of the episode for me. House. Gregory House is an awful human being. People allow him to continue being an awful human being because he's a genius who solves seemingly impossible medical cases. His main defining character trait is that he shows no sympathy to his patients. To him, they are less people with real lives and emotions, so much as they are a problem to be solved. This is not necessarily a bad thing. A character like that has the potential to be the centre of some very interesting TV drama. His heartless attitude brushing up against the more compassionate people around him can be compelling, and certainly was for the first few seasons of the show. But this episode is in season 8. 164 episodes in. All the potentially interesting conflict or growth has already been played out and the rot has set in. House's actions have become so disconnected and uncomfortable that the only way to justify him being like that now is to keep having him succeed, so that the ends justify the means. House is an absolute trash human, but damn it, he gets results. So the patient's asexuality is presented to us solely as a fun case for House to crack in between the more serious main story. House destroying this man's entire identity for $100 is the light relief of the episode. There was never going to be even the slightest chance that House wasn't going to have a solution to it. The asexual couple are not characters. I mean, I even had to go on IMDb to find out if they have names. They are purely there to make House look smart. In this story, asexuality never had a chance of being seen as valid, because House had to be right. House broadly declares that sex is the only thing that drives our species. According to him, everyone instinctively craves sex, and the people who don't are lying, which is honestly a pretty typical reaction people can have when confronted with a worldview outside of their own, to deny it completely, because if it doesn't apply to them directly, then it surely can't be real. There is actually the potential for a really wonderful piece of representation that could have been done in giving House this unshakable certainty in his views on sex. In fact, you can keep almost all of the original premise. House hears about asexuality, doesn't believe it exists, and sets out to prove himself right. All you have to do in that scenario to make this good is for House to turn out to be wrong for once. Let him find nothing wrong with the couple who are both happily asexual and valid. Asexuality gets to be shown as legitimate. House can acknowledge that sometimes he doesn't know absolutely everything, and I don't have to spend my spare time getting annoyed by an episode of a procedural medical drama from 8 years ago. But as we've established, House can't be wrong at this point, so something potentially interesting and compassionate like that can't happen, and instead we get stuck with House disproving a person's sexual identity for a lark. Now, you might be wondering, why does this matter? House left the pop culture consciousness years ago. Why bring this up? But you see, this was the first time that any major TV network featured a character who identifies as asexual. This set the standard for people's understanding of this orientation, of my orientation. Almost 9 million people watched this episode when it first aired, and more since, and were taught that the correct way to respond when someone tells you that they're asexual is with cynicism and disbelief. To look on this valid sexual orientation as a symptom of illness or as a lie. That's why I think this episode is still worth talking about. Media has an influence on people whether they know it or not, and the effect of this kind of thinking towards a marginalised group can potentially be really harmful. Hey, Editor David from the future here. Just to say that in the bit that's about to come up, I talk about the writer of the episode, Kath Lingenfelter, and I accidentally said her name as Lingenfeld for some reason in all of the takes that I did. So I'm just going to dub in this footage of me saying her name correctly, awkwardly, over the footage that's already there. I hope you hate it. So we have to ask the question, why would someone write this? Did someone in the writer's room for House just have it in for asexuals and wanted to discredit the very notion? Was this a targeted attack? I mean, I don't think so. At the time the episode was released, the asexual community responded with some pretty understandable criticism, and it seems that the writer of the episode, Kath Lingenfelter, replied to some of that on Twitter. I say it seems because I've only been able to find this quoted secondhand in the Avon forums, and I couldn't find the actual tweets on Lingenfelter's timeline, probably because they're 8 years old. So even though it does seem legitimate enough to me, we should perhaps consider it with a slight grain of salt. My original intent was to introduce and legitimise it, because I was struck by the response most of you experience, which is similar to the prejudice the homosexual community has received. People hear you're asexual and they immediately think, what's wrong with you? How do I fix you? I wanted to write against that. Unfortunately, we are a medical mystery show. Time and again, my notes came back that House needed to solve a mystery and not be wrong. So in this case, with these patients, it was a tumour near the pituitary, but I hoped I could, now it seems unsuccessfully, introduce asexuality to the general public and get them asking questions. If we are to take this as written, then we can see that Kath Lingenfelter genuinely wanted to introduce asexuality as a legitimate thing and open up a real discussion around it, but was hampered by the kind of show she was writing for. It's certainly a shame that she didn't realise the potential harm her writing was doing here, but the last thing I want to do is to lay blame on an individual for this. She seems to have been unaware of the way that this came across until people pointed it out to her after the fact, and I get that. When you're writing something, it's easy to get tunnel vision and to not notice when you've got something wrong, especially if you're writing about something that you yourself haven't personally experienced. Which is not to say never write about things you don't know, otherwise we would have a lot more TV shows about people staring at the blinking cursor on a blank Word document while eating their third sleeve of depression Oreos. But if you're writing about something as potentially delicate as a misunderstood sexual orientation, then it might be a good idea to go to people with that orientation for their input. That way they can let you know when you've screwed up, and you could have a chance to fix it. Saying words is hard. Like, that's my pro tip for everyone out there. Do not say words. My best friend bought me this ace flag as a gift last year, and at first, I didn't know what to do with it. So I just draped it over my couch, which wasn't great because my cat was climbing all over it and got it covered in hairs. So I hung it up over the door to my kitchen, which was fantastic because now it was on display. I could see it from where I sit in the living room. But it was sideways, the stripes were the wrong way round, which wasn't a huge deal, but it was enough to bug my brain. So I came up with a better idea. I nailed together 2 canvases and attached the flag to it using staples and tacking nails. I tucked a couple of towels in the back so it acted as sound dampening in this room that I film in, and I then hung it to the wall using these plastic hooks, the kind that you put the sticky strips on the back to put them on the wall, and then tucked it under the centre bar of the canvas. So my flag was finally up and it was the right way around. But because I'm an Egypt, I hung it slightly too high up on the wall, so that when I filmed my Ace video in front of it last year, I had to stand on a stool. Movie magic. But it was up, it looked good, it could have just been slightly better. Then, about 8 months later, it suddenly fell off the wall, taking the hooks with it. This shook me up no end at first, but I thought, you know what, this gives me a chance to hang it up in the right height. So that's what I did, and I even grabbed an extra hook this time. So the flag was up, it looked good, it was in the right place. It fell off the wall again a week later. so it's just been sitting on the floor here since, waiting for me to do something with it. Representation is a lot like me and my flag. It starts out bad, ill-considered, poorly thought out, a bit of a general mess. But as time goes on, it gets better and better. You start to see things that really represent your community and identity and show them to the world. You keep trying and you keep improving. Of course, sometimes things will fall and it will feel like no one understands you. But all you have to do is compare the first attempts and compare the more recent attempts, and you'll see the progress. I have bought some canvas hangers. These are specifically designed to hold something like this up. I didn't even know these existed before, but I did some research and got a better understanding. So my flag will go up on the wall again, and it will hang better. Maybe it'll fall off, but that's okay, because every time I will hang it back up better than it was the time before.